Before we start today's episode, let me tell you about my latest adventure. Introducing Lux Coffee Co., a specialty-grade coffee company inspired by creativity and creatives. The debut range is sourced from some of the best farms in Brazil, Peru, Colombia, and Africa, offering beautiful flavors and notes. Our single origins and house blends are roasted every Monday for next day shipping. Visit luxcoffee.co.uk and use code PODCAST for 15% off your first order. And yes, there's exceptional merch too. Lux Coffee Co. is where art meets exceptional coffee.
We'll produce all this stuff to do all these things. And what they didn't realise is that we would get to the point, which I think we're arriving at now, where we are screen weary by the end of the day. And being immersed in these environments all the time is not good for us. We kind of work that out, I think, for ourselves. So we are pushing back. It's not all of that stuff all the time. Vinyl has character. Print books, magazines are on the way back up, especially in visual arts. You want to sit and soak it up without it glowing into your face with a load of harmful blue light.
Hello and welcome to Creativity for Sale podcast, a show to help you start and grow your life-changing creative career and business. My name is Radim Malinic and creativity changed my life. You see, I believe creativity can change your life too. I even wrote a book about it and it inspired this podcast. I've set out to interview the world's most brilliant creatives, designers, writers, musicians, makers and marketeers about their life-changing experiences with creativity. If you ever wanted to know how people go from their humble beginnings to the pinnacle of their success, our conversation should provide you with an intimate look into triumphs, challenges and untold stories behind their creative endeavors. We also discuss the highs and lows of creative careers and creative life. So, thank you for joining me on this exploration of passion, creativity, innovation and the boundless potential within us all. Let creativity change your life. Are you ready? My guest today is best described as a creative utility knife and educator with a long career in every corner of the creative industry. His impressive expertise and reputation as an instructor and author have led him to create popular titles for LinkedIn Learning, attracting over 2.2 million learners. As a host or guest at industry events, he delivers his content with humor and infectious enthusiasm. It's my pleasure to introduce Tony Harmer. Hey Tony, it's nice to have you on my show. How are you doing today?
No, I'm doing really well, Radim. Thank you very much for having me on.
I've been looking forward to our conversation for a while. I was especially pleased to see you come up in my diary this morning. I was like, oh, right. I want to talk about learning and industry standard ways of learning sort of software and features, because obviously you are slightly ahead of me on your life journey, and we're both about ahead of the novices and rookies in the industry. And I feel like when we were coming through the ranks, there was always the industry way of using something, like there was an industry way of using Quark Express, there was industry way of using Photoshop, like how we layer files, how we navigate in order to the features and how we do certain adjustments. Whereas now, would you agree things are a little bit more, not gung-ho, but less policed or less, do whatever you want. That's the best way to say it. How would you describe it?
First of all, I love the way that you just said a little bit further on in life's journey than you are, which is a great way of saying you're an old guy. But I love it. But anyway, yeah, I do agree that it is a little bit like that, but that's partly on the vendors. The vendors don't really invest in learning material anymore. A lot of the vendors are the ones that I work with anyway. So it is a bit more gung-ho, but that's because the people with enough experience to actually write the content are either not writing it or are writing it for someone other than the vendor.
Just so we can clarify, when you say vendor, you mean
whoever makes the software. Sorry, there's me with my terms.
No, so for example, like the vendor would be, let's say, Adobe.
Adobe, yeah, or Microsoft, or whoever, insert name of company here. Yeah, sorry, that in the industry, that's the way they're referred to as the vendor, the people who actually sell the software or sell. Do you know, I ought to clarify that. Sell the license to use the software, because this is a common misconception, and it became subscription-based things started to surface around about 2012 with Adobe 2013. and that lots of people kicked off and said, I want to own it. You've never owned a software product. You've owned a license to operate it, and a license can be revoked at any time, just to point that out. So just for clarity, a license to operate it, which is what you do with a subscription on a month by month basis. Your license is renewed for you to continue using it. That's how it works. It's from a legal point of view. But anyway, as companies grow and as younger people who are the customers of tomorrow need to start using that stuff, a lot of those people end up working at the companies because they've got a voice that younger people can relate to. But what they don't have is they no longer have the people with the experience to dive down into the details of the product. Does that sort of make sense?
It does make sense. Yeah, we'll talk about more about the people creating and the materials, because what you described, and it almost seemed like a universal paradoxical problem, because you've got a software which is so interactive, so visual, so sort of enhancing productivity, yet you kind of need a manual to navigate it, which is fine. But we know that, let's say we established the word vendors, what they've done, they try to be more interactive. So you've got a home screen where you can see what's happening and what's the tutorials. But sometimes the break barrier, it can be so daunting like that. Like, how do you go from even A to B? Because let's liken it to learning a language or playing an instrument. So you can get somewhere with a handful of words or handful of chords. You can do the basics, but the next step to be from rookie to be slightly advanced or intermediate, that takes time. That actually takes time and finessing. And sometimes you can press every single key, you can try every single feature to no return, because you actually need different ingredients to put things together. Because if you press a filter on a basic picture, it just might not do as much as an effect as you would use it as a retoucher who would use the effect of some completely magnificent results. And it's almost like, how do we go, and this might be a godly question, like how do we go actually sort of deciphering, how do we get it to people that they can actually accelerate their progress much, much quicker? What is your view on that?
Well, so most things can be, if you're going to say, you could no more learn all of Photoshop in a week than you could learn all of Kung Fu. Kung Fu is one of my favorite analogies for Photoshop, right? And I've said this for years and years, partly because I went to a martial arts academy for quite a time when I was younger, much fitter. Kind of wish I hadn't let that go. But anyway, in Kung Fu, there are various different ways of achieving a particular result. Okay. The result you should use is the one that you know, the one that you've practiced, and do that. And if you're in that situation again, you need to, and you found that to be an inelegant way of doing it, then you need to learn another technique. The situation that you're in, the technique that you use is the right one for you. And I've always used that and said, you can use whatever way you get to the end product that you choose to use. There are almost always quicker ways to do it. There are almost always more elegant ways to do it. But use what you know at the time. And that's the thing. Now, if I may, this is part of the problem that we have at the moment, is that we get people who have a moderate amount of knowledge. Let's choose my favorite product, Illustrator, right? They have a moderate amount of knowledge in Illustrator. They've been making great work in Illustrator, which is perfectly valid. But then they decide they're going to produce a course from which others will hopefully advance their knowledge from. And then they discover that there's a whole other world that they yet don't know, the people who are teaching the course. And then they have to go back on whether, do you see what I mean? It's a descending spiral.
And I think what you describe, and I think it's a great analogy about it takes time after you find your own ways to do things. I think, and if you're in a singular sort of module, like you're creating your own work and you don't necessarily collaborate with people, you can do that all day long. But as soon as it comes to handing over files to someone across the town, across the globe, then things become a little bit more complicated, because as someone from my experience who've had to deliver Photoshop files, in those scenarios, I was always trying to work out, like, what is the best way to give it to people so they can make a sense of it if they need to make change. And finding ways of always tinkering with it. And like, okay, this process could be potentially helpful, like more usable, more flexible, because you want to work in a non-destructible way. So things can be reversed if someone needs to change stuff. But that comes with collaboration. So yes, what you described, that you can be working in Illustrator your own way for 20 years, and then you show it, then you show up with something to somebody else and realize, how do we do this? What have you done here? How can I undo this? Because I always say, like, if you have fun, just open someone else's InDesign file and be like, what have you done? Like, what's going on here? And I appreciate that obviously people use tools differently. That's why we get progress in life. That's why we get advancements in creativity and technology. But like, is it even possible to instill some sort of ground rules that this should be done this way, this should be done that way? Is that even possible?
Well, I believe it is. In my own Illustrator courses, I think I've cracked almost the right way of delivering that over the number of years that I've been producing those courses, which are, by the way, the ones that Illustrator engineers use when they join the team to learn about the product, which is engineers don't sit at university and go, oh, I want to go and work on Adobe, or are they unlikely to? I'm not going to say they're not, they're unlikely to say, I can't wait to get out of university and go and work on Adobe Illustrator. Engineers are problem solvers. They'll go wherever. They'll see a job ad, that says, come and work for Adobe as an engineer. And they'll go there and they'll think, I don't know anything about Illustrator. So they have to learn to start off with. So I believe there is a way that you can structure it. Also, as somebody who has worked evidentially as a workflow expert, used to use that term very loosely, right? I do believe there is a way that you can build, or you can get the basic platform established, then you can start to build on that platform. You used to play hockey, didn't you?
Okay, yeah.
But you would know yourself, right, that if from lots of sporting activities, good fundamentals, same with Kung Fu, good fundamentals enable you to develop more quickly and more efficiently. But by the way, just a quick side note, quick sidebar on something you said a moment ago. Going back to the Kung Fu analogy, a quote master, unquote, can learn something from somebody who's only been using the product for an hour. It's entirely possible to do that.
I think it was Rick Rubin who was laboring the quote about the game of Go, that there was a computer that used the things in a totally different way. I absolutely believe that if you give someone something to more or less break it, they'll show you the ways that you never intended to be used in that way. So that makes sense. However, if you gave someone a car and said, drive that car in any way you want, that's not going to really end up well, right? So I think
It's not. It's unlikely, isn't it, Rick?
And I don't really want to be laboring this sort of conservative way of, we should have a baseline from which we start, but it's all about a collaboration and interchange of files and hand, because yes, sometimes you can open someone else's file and go, oh my word, this is a clever way of doing this. I didn't know this, even after 20 years, I didn't know that you can use it that way. So sometimes there is ways, and we'll talk about your courses in a second, because I've learned from watching a few hours of your videos.
Thank you.
Every month, like things that I didn't know for the last 20 years. But I just feel, yes, I think we need that sort of naive riotous behavior when we start with the project, with the software, and go, yes, let's find out what we can do with it. But I just wonder, how can we even think and educate or instigate a sort of this education that, there is rules that if you build your files in the same way, then you can actually be more experimental. And as you say, like, to have people that know to have the vendors who like necessarily the talent who'll be able to write the books. And the books then seem almost sometimes quite inaccessible because they come out every other year. Because with the speed that Adobe, for example, is bringing out new features, you don't have time to even change the pages or print them fast enough. So where do we even go from trying to get the basics right and then to be on top of every single new feature?
One of the things that if you're going to do something that, going back to being based on need, if you find that you're in a situation where you're going to be producing a file which is going to be sent across to other people for a intended output, be that digital or print or whatever, if you can, talk to the people who produce stuff for that particular output in the first place. Many, many years ago now, I used to go and sit with people who worked in artworking departments in printers and learn from them, mainly by sending them really bad files that they had to fix. And just go and sit and watch how they fixed it. Because they were the people who sat and read manuals. There weren't any courses when I started out in this. There were only 1.5 inch thick books that took a while to wade through, that also every 18 months they changed then. And by the time you got the new manual printed and distributed as it was, 6 months of that 18-month cycle had already evaporated. It's a difficult thing. Now, you would like to think that I'm going to use Adobe as an example here, right? But they are far and away not the worst example of this, far and away. And they are in many ways pretty good. But even Adobe, if you want help on learning a particular thing, sometimes it requires quite some effort on your part to go through their own thing to find it, because increasingly the way they and I think they've picked this up from Microsoft to do this a lot. They decide to produce a short video on a particular thing. So I'm just trying to think about, so using live paint, I have no idea if in Illustrator, I have no idea if this is actually the case on the Adobe website. There's a thing called HelpX, which is their resource for all of their applications. And you'll know when you're in that, because that's part of the URL that you've gone to. It will say helpx.adobe.com, la, la, la. So let's just say you want to use live paint is a really cool feature in Illustrator, and it will save you loads of time, and you think you want to use it because it's a great interactive way to color up things that you've basically drawn the outlines for. And you go to the Adobe website and you've got a video that says, make a live paint object, and then switch to the live paint bucket. And then you can see the live paint bucket filling different sectors inside your illustration, which is great. But the video on its own doesn't do the trick, because there are loads of tiny things around that will save you time. Yeah, there will be no mention in the video of if you want to sample a color from something else on the artboard, you can hold down the Option key just as you would in Photoshop and pick up that color. So none of that, there would be none of that in there. It would just be like, make a live paint object, do that. And people are actually smarter than that. I think they're doing young people a disservice by saying, well, young people learn best by video, which is probably true. But I think by oversimplifying it, and it's a difficult balance because you've got to make it accessible to that audience, but also they do need a level of detail. So my answer to that would be make 3 more videos. So you've got 3-4 levels to go through.
I think you made the right point about that. You need to make some effort on your part, because essentially when you get to needing to work out how to use a live paint, you actually need to know how you're using the basics. Because I'm sorry for the description about age, but
no, I love it. I'm still in the game.
When I was at the beginning, which was 24 years ago, I bought, Illustrator 8, 7, I bought a book, and I just wanted to know what key presses what, because I grew up in a time where you were judged as a designer, like how noisy is your keyboard when you work, like you're pressing the keys, you're working, like this is like there was no hands in the pocket. Get your hands out, and I started hammering the keyboard, press all the shortcuts, and that was like a sign of, are you a good designer? Because it speeds up your workflow. So what I did, we almost had a keyboard shortcut Olympics with a colleague of mine. I was like, look, I just found a new shortcut for this. I found a new shortcut for that. And I know from memory, like Command Shift F10 is, for stroke, for oh my God, I right today, for effects palettes. Like, these things that just, they exist. And I just thought always, you don't want to be going into the menus all the time, because I've got a whopping big Wacom and I don't want to be dragging my Wacom all day, all the way to menus and going down. Because to me, especially from the keyboard, like use of software it's like an instrument. You don't want to be looking like, where is the note C? Where's the chord? Like, where do I look on my guitar? Or where do I look on the keyboard? Like, you want to play it intuitively. Like, you want to make it as a second nature. And I think that's still an instrumental part of actually mastering the basic, because when it comes to solving a problem, you suggest to go to HelpX. I just type in something in YouTube, something comes up, and you're like, there's 5 different options. By the time you've seen all 5 of them, you realize everyone's wrong. In a way, how do we win? What I've been deciphering here is my past of being gung-ho in the usage of software, especially working on my own as an illustrator. Then I got to work with retouchers, and it totally changed my life, because obviously the files for campaigns have to be so militantly like organized, and everything has to be in the right place. And they gave me the file, and I just started breaking it up within a minute. It took the guy about half an hour to fix it, because I was like, moving things up and down, because I was just like a bit of a keyboard ninja, to use your analogy, just to go up and down. It's like, what have you done? Stop. Because I'm adding my elements and pieces. It's like, no. There's a rule to do this. There's a rule to do that. And I mean, I've never become a designer or illustrator. Like, always you clean up at the end, but it's more about like, okay, now I know there's a time to hand stuff over. But I think my laborious way of explaining this, that was we've started with the basics and we adding on top. Whereas if you end up at the gates of the Disneyland, which what the software is now, you go, oh my word, like what do you press first? Because you can get a course and someone else said you did that way, you did this way. I think that's the nature of creativity, that everyone's got their own way. And that's just, can we ever have one way of suggesting that we can all agree on? Or sometimes comes to me quite impossible. So I want to talk about your educational side. How did you end up with where you are right now, to sharing the principles of software and creativity? And yeah, what journey has it been so far?
Okay, there are several strands that kind of pull together at a certain point. As I was in part of my own learning journey, and learning is something I commit to and still commit to every day for at least 15 minutes. Every single day. There is never a day that I don't do that. Sometimes I might go down a rabbit hole, end up there all day if I've got the time to do it. Other times it might just be the 15 minutes, but never less than 15 minutes. So I wanted to learn more. I wanted to become more efficient. I didn't want my files to be garbage when they got, mainly it was for print back then, at the beginning of this journey. I didn't want my files to be garbage. So I had an immediate need to learn. And then it became the point where when I worked with other agencies and other people, because I was freelance for like a long, long time, I became, the term used is the Adobe guy. There's a kind of an in-joke at Adobe, actually. This is before I was at Adobe. There's an Adobe guy in every organization. And by that, there is a man or woman who knows a lot about a particular tool or set of tools because they've invested in it. And so I just developed this crazy skill set and found myself spending a lot of time talking to other people and helping them do stuff. And someone said, you should be a trainer. You should do that. And so I went and got myself a teaching certification because I'm very particular about doing things. I want to do them properly. It's a double-edged sword. It is both a gift and a curse at the same time sometimes, but I want to do it properly. So I went and qualified as a teacher, which taught me things about delivering, because it's not just about being able to use a tool, it's about being able to explain it to someone else and about having a structure that works for people. I've got 2.2 million active learners. My Illustrator training is the default training for Adobe, for the United States Army, for Honeywell, for loads of other wacky organizations that you'd never expect to be using Illustrator, but they do.
So let me unpick your LinkedIn educational programs and training, because you mentioned it's used by, US Army and Honeywell. Like, you would never even think of that in the first place. How does Army need Adobe Illustrator?
Well, every branch of the government that has to communicate. And the British Army is no different. The British Army has a communications unit that does all of their photography. Well, used to, I don't know about now. Does all their photography, all of their layout, all of that stuff. Also, they have to produce things for people who are serving in those forces that you might not want third-party vendors to be involved in. So there are a number of things that you might get in an instructional guide from the military, just sticking with that example for a moment, that, yeah, they have a special unit who already understand the language used in that particular service. And so, yeah, they have to draw stuff same as lots of other people do, but they can't farm it out to an agency.
So they're all learning from your tools. They're all using...
Yeah, well, yeah, it's kind of fun.
That's incredible. I mean, obviously, they come into the right source because, as I said earlier, like the way you use Illustrator with the wealth of your knowledge and experience, you're unlocking potential that makes the software even richer and more deeper in a way. Because if you use it your way, let's say in a rookie way or in a sort of chaotic riotous way, then you always will find a ceiling. Obviously, you'll find a wall. I just sort of quite famously once said I found the back end of the Photoshop and I couldn't use it in any different way because I got everything out of it, but I only followed my own rules and my own sort of way of using things. Whereas I wasn't necessarily thinking like, okay, what else can I do with it? Because there's so much more to do with it. But is it lack of curiosity sometimes that people don't progress? Or how would you encourage someone to actually send and look out for this education and look out for these tips and tricks that you provide?
So here's one of the common misconceptions people have about how good they are with a particular product is, in my experience, normally based on one self-imposed metric, right? How quick they do whatever it is they are doing every day. Yeah. What you should, and for example, if your job is to prepare small digital ads for, I don't know, microphones, for example, yeah, you'll be bringing the microphone image in, you'll know how to cut the microphone image out of the background, you'll know how to set the type, you perhaps created styles to do all of that stuff. And so you're getting faster and faster at doing it, and you don't really have to think about it. You've got tons and tons of muscle memory. So you think you're ace at doing whatever product you're doing it in. And it's not until you branch outside of that do you suddenly realize not as ace as I thought it was. You'll work like that, think you're really good at it. So yeah, it is a lack of curiosity, I guess, in that way, right? I mean, it is. And also just accepting the first answer that you see. Now, you said about watching 4 or 5 videos, which is a good approach to take to learning something. I can give you a really good example. So when I was doing workflow analysis, which I still do as a consultant, but when that was part of my job at Adobe, I would go out and see how people were working and then suggest ways that they could work a bit quicker. It's always for the benefit of the company that's hiring me to do that ultimately, right? Because they'll be more profitable and whatever if you're getting more throughput out. But that's not that angle I take it. So I take it from 2 angles. One, really good for a company. And there's nothing wrong with making your company more profitable. That's why you've got a job there. It's in your own interest, if you like working there, to make them profitable. But also, if you're a freelancer, it's in your own interest to get things done as quickly and as efficiently and as accurately as possible, because that way you spend less time fixing stuff afterwards. And more importantly than that, from the point of view, if you're the originator of a piece of work rather than just an artworker, you get extra time to be more critical about what you've just done before you hand the job off, that you've bought yourself that time by doing it. I can give you one very quick example of that. Years ago, and we're talking about 7, 8 years ago, there was a video on YouTube. I buy other people's courses. I want to see how they're teaching things. I watch YouTube content from loads of different people because I want to see how they're teaching things. And I watched a 20-minute video about producing an icon based on an old style telephone, those ones that used to pick up and put to your ear, that sort of thing with a cable coming out the bottom of it. It was drawing a telephone, and it took 20 minutes to draw this telephone icon. I made a video and did it in under a minute. Exactly the same thing. Just as really to just, it wasn't about demonstrating how clever I was at drawing telephone icons, not really something that comes up in my day to day. The point was the understanding I had of the tools made it so that I could draw that with 19 minutes to spare.
We'll be back after a quick break.
If you're enjoying this podcast and would like more support and information on your creative journey, you can pick up one of my books to help you do just that. My titles cover branding, graphic design, illustration, all the way to career business advice with ideas how to navigate the highs and lows of the creative process. You can pick up signed paperbacks at no extra cost from my store at novemberuniverse.co.uk, and we are shipping worldwide. Use code PODCAST for extra 10% off your order, and you can find the links in the show notes. Any day should be a new book day. But it goes to that famous saying that you can draw it in 30 seconds because it's taking you 30 years to learn how to draw it in 30 seconds. I think we fast less, produce less options and go straight to the answer. Whereas what you actually quite interestingly said that as a freelancer, you want to be working faster. That reinforces my point of knowing your shortcuts, knowing your sort of the base level of things. But I think it also works as a double-edged sword because you can be working faster and therefore you've got a few hours spare. So instead of finishing early, you spend more time on revisions. You spend more time on doubting yourself. Do I need to change this? Do I need to do that? Do I add this? Do I take this out? Because sometimes we have never-ending recipes.
Yeah, this is true. Yeah.
If you have your mise en place, if you have your little bowls of ingredients, you put them together, you're not going to think, shall I add chocolate in my omelette? Should I do this? Like not necessarily. Whereas if there's a designer, like I definitely need to add chocolate to my omelette because we need to find out whether that will come out. So I think sometimes being speedy and efficient actually makes for devil's work because
Possibly. Yeah.
I always say that creativity is an untamed beast. Unless you've got limitations, time-wise or project-wise or something, you will never finish on time. Like we are never finished because we can always see if that chocolate will fit in the omelette one day or not. So I think this is our problem because, mastering the basics can sometimes produce too much of a sort of efficiency and take us somewhere where we don't really want to be. So, who knows what was the right sort of method to all of this because it's subjective because especially if you're in a company and you work faster, you're going to get more work. I had a team of people who worked really well and they were like, what's next? I'm like, spend 3 days on this. You got time. Don't give it to me in 3 hours because you've done something. Spend 3 days, bash it around, like have a look, like just see what you can do with it because we sometimes complain we don't have enough time to work. And sometimes when we have too much time, you're like, I'm actually done. But it's about taking the wheel and see like, okay, it's always going to be a wheel, but I can reinvent it in some way that it spins nicer. It swooshes better. Like we can always find something in these little things because we can't bullshit the physics. We can't bullshit the reality, but we can always redress it in a way that it will spin in some way and somewhere nicer that we never thought we could do with it. So I think we need rioters. We need the wheel as a sort of baseline and we need the riots to see what we can do with it. But with every riot, sooner or later, you will need a bit of a rule to see where you're going with the riot. Because otherwise, the 6-year-olds playing football. It's just like everyone's running in the same direction and no one's really winning, But
I mean, I personally, I like, so I think confidence in a software is a good thing to build because you're quite right. It isn't just about getting it done in quicker and moving on to the next thing. Sometimes it's about getting the basic structure as you think it should be right, but doing that quickly, leaving it alone for a little while, leaving it on screen, go and have a cup of tea, have a walk, do whatever, then come back and look at it again. And if you're able to work on it quickly and confidently and you see something that you think, what would happen if I did this? That's where versions come in and you create versions and then you've got that exploration. But what you're not doing is thinking of the idea, but then spending the entire allocated time doing it, just in building it the first time out. That's how I see the need to build confidence in a software, doing it.
I think that's a good key word, confidence. I was lecturing at university in Staffordshire yesterday, and it's that same age-old story of the university is not teaching us how to use this properly. The university is not doing this to us. But I always use John Mayer as an example of a musician who went to Berkeley for about 7 minutes, I think.
Same as me. That was only because I took a wrong turn.
Yeah, because he realized I can only learn this much. I can do this, I can see it through this clinic, I can do this. But he went away and I think over the Christmas period, he wrote 4 or 5 key songs that started his career. But he's still till this today, like he does guitar tutorials or like he's learning from other people, he's picking up techniques. It's a constant journey of actually being able to step on that stage or show up for work and sit down and go, you know what? Anyone can look over my shoulder. I don't mind because I know what I'm doing here. Because you speak to any designer like, oh, I don't really people like looking over my shoulder. Because it's a lack of confidence. It's more about being ready for what's thrown at us because you can have your own pigeonholed style. You can have a signature style and you don't deviate. Whereas if you're a generalist, you want to be that design ninja. Like you want to be versatile and ready, because if you're creating broader solutions for people, you need to know the ideas, how you can get somewhere, because you might not always have the full path, but you're like, okay, this is where I start.
I used to use an analogy like that. It's not necessary to know how let's go petrol head and say combustion engine, right? It's not necessary to know how the internal combustion engine works in order to drive a car. However, knowing how it sounds helps you to understand that you're using it properly. If the engine noise is super, super loud, the car is overheating and eventually is kaput, it's because you've been driving everywhere in first gear. And just not understanding that little thing between the gearbox and the combustion engine helps you with that. So I used to use a similar analogy myself. You don't need to know, but it's helpful if you do.
Very true. Where do you see future of? So obviously you've been doing your LinkedIn learning for 10 years, more than one or two things about how far we've come in the last decade. Where do you think things will be even heading in the next 10 years? Because generative AI, all of these tools, like what I call tools on steroids, like everything's developing so much faster, because it's almost like when you think about the history of digital memory. When someone told me 25 years ago they had a computer with 2 gig memory, it was like, how you're a champion.
Yeah.
Whereas 2 gig memory is like, it's just,
Now it's 128 gigs.
it's just like, my computer's got 2 terabytes. But I mean, the chips are getting smaller. They're like, we're developing faster. So what, for example, generative AI is getting better every 6 months or every 6 weeks. So we're making progresses which are unheard of. Sometimes I feel like we struggle even to compute in our own heads and digest it and for process it. Like, what is going on? Like, how quickly is it changing? Because as opposed to celebrating, most of our peers and contemporaries are panicking about their livelihood. Like, we'll be replaced. But no, you can't replace the talent because you can't replace the client. So I mean, are we going to then see machines doing work for one another? Like, what's going to happen? So prediction for the next, I was going to say 10 years, but it sounds like more like next 10 minutes.
Sometimes it does. What you would hope is that, I mean, generative AI, by the way, is not a solution. Yeah, it isn't a solution, nor should it be a solution, right? It should be something that helps you be more creative and takes some of the, I don't like the term drudgery. It is used that takes the drudgery out of doing it. Drudgery to me is going down into the cold, dark earth and fetching back coal. That's definitely drudgery. Drudgery is doing washing up after Christmas dinner or whatever, or some feast. That's kind of drudgery. But anyway, it takes the labor out of stuff. So I would hope that it just takes creativity forward, because it's not really about how we're working now. That's the thing we should be looking at. What's the future for how we work now? The future is on what surfaces we will be working. And I don't mean by that whether you'll be working on a Wacom tablet with a stylus. A surface, the definition of a surface in the way that I'm using it at the moment is, for example, with print, paper is a surface, right? With digital, the screen that you're looking at it through is a surface. And of course, we've got things like the Apple Vision Pro and headset things. They're an entirely different surface. So more and more we're going, I think the future for the next 10 years is going to be more things that are truly immersive. And by that, I mean you're actually physically involved in them. I think that's the next challenge. So if somebody would say to me at the moment, what should I learn? Yeah. Once I've got all of my desktop skills to where I want them to be in Illustrator, Photoshop, because those things won't go away. They'll still need those. What should I learn on top of that to future-proof myself? 20 years ago, I'd have said, learn the web, learn some structural markup, and then learn some CSS so you know how to correctly style things in a connected way. Then start to learn one thing or another. But 3D is a good thing to learn right now, even at a base level. Working in a 3D environment, and AR is a good thing to work in. If you're working in video, you definitely want to be looking at panoramic video, 360-degree video, all of those things. Those are the things to look at, because those are the surfaces that are going to evolve.
So it's interesting that you picked up, for example, AI and video, because I always try to see like through the eyes of two visions from my own view and from a presumed point of view of a consumer. So you have people like, let's say, my wife or my children or the people that you see on a high street. How often will they come across, immersive 360 AR videos? Like we creating sometimes tools, and especially when I think of the VR headsets and that kind of stuff, we cannot really replace or wholesale change our experiences, because we're not going to be sat in our rooms watching movies on our AR headsets for 3-4 hours, or, have walking around in the house. I mean, everyone sort of says that, well, everyone, there has been voices about Vision Pro being something remarkable, but have we created too much too fast? Because I find myself doing lectures on mindfulness, paraphrasing Des Bishop's joke about the fact that when you and I were growing up, we were mindful most of our lives because we didn't have a cable service in our pocket. We didn't have the nudge to pull the phone out. And now, okay, so, here's your goggles and here's your, 17 different screens and you can watch a movie and that's basically a recipe for a head fart. I've got 27-inch screen. I used to have 2 screens. I've scaled down to 1 because it was just too much. It was like, I found myself overwhelmed, overworked, never finished. And we creating tools that have the right potential, but I think we always default slightly close to our baselines, just like we did with Kindles and internet, that kind of stuff. Like nothing has killed the initial things we ever created, because we're getting tapes back, we're getting vinyl back, we're getting things that actually felt physically something when you have time to spend with it. That makes sense, rather than having freaking ginormous browser windows in the middle of a Starbucks. I'm like, what's going on?
I'm sure that people who produce those things like Apple would love a future where we're all sat there all day eating Cheetos and watching everything through a headset. So what you're describing there is the pushback or the backwash from these things. And you are a great person, and you're a great person in a lot of ways, but especially your drive at the moment in being mindful about what we're doing. Everybody thought that by now, everybody that I knew in the industry 10 years ago thought that by now paper would be a thing of the past largely. There would be no more bookshops in airports. There would be no more magazines around. We would be consuming things entirely on tablets. And that's great. We'll produce all this stuff to do all these things. And what they didn't realize is that we would get to the point, which I think we're arriving at now, where we are screen weary by the end of the day. And being immersed in these environments all the time is not good for us. We kind of work that out, I think, for ourselves. So we are pushing back. Print is on its way back. We already know that vinyl has been on its way back up for a number of years. Everybody wants vinyl now because it's got character. It's not clinical 48 kilohertz or 44.8 kilohertz because it's slightly different for a DVD, CD or whatever else, or for streamed audio. It's not all of that stuff all the time. Vinyl has character. Print books, magazines are on the way back up. You can buy subscriptions for print and digital. And from what I've heard from the people I know and work in that area, they've gotten a really surprising demand for print copies, especially in visual arts. You want to sit and soak it up without it glowing into your face with a load of harmful blue light. So there is a backwash against it. So maybe right now, because it's a buzz thing and because they need to sell units in order to push it forward, maybe it is.
I think it's the share price that drives the sort of so-called invention. Yeah, because of money. Like I was stagnating, and I spoke to Rufus a few weeks ago about Adobe and Sensei and that kind of stuff. And do you have to keep up? Because they already had AI in so many different ways in their product, and they didn't necessarily promote it in a way. They didn't label it AI, and felt like, potentially, from my opinion, they feel like they need to catch up. But when you talked about vinyl, I've seen a great joke about I got into vinyl because of the price and inconvenience. It's just like, it takes space. I buy 5-6 books a month, and then I have to give away 5 or 6 books a month. But it's like you can share your ideas so much quicker. You can actually, that's the reason why I'm still doing books, and I'll be doing another 4 or 5 books in a very short near future, because this is the time to do it now. Because even though we have to branch out, and people like, they have to branch out like in different formats. We do audio books and Kindle and that kind of stuff, because you get the old school designer saying, oh, will never buy design book on Kindle. You know what? There's such a market for Kindle that you never believe. Audiobooks are selling. And it's like, you have to give people something that they would associate with. Some people prefer to listen to Spotify podcasts. Some people are Apple podcasts. Some people never listen to podcasts. They prefer to listen to them on YouTube. Like, we have democratized the ways how we can get stuff that feels right for us. Like, some people will never listen to music on YouTube. Some people only listen to music on YouTube. And it's just, okay, this is great. Obviously, we don't have the one track highway going, here's your podcast, here's your this. Robbie Sutherland was good in doing a good analogy about it, like how we don't get internet and a mobile phone and I think a landline or something from one company because we don't believe that anyone can do it well. So you don't get your BT mobile and a BT broadband. You do it from different companies because you feel there's one person for one thing and they should do it in a particular way. So I think when you sort of consider it, like, okay, so let's make software for people, we're like, where do we start? And for example, I know from conversation with Matthias Schulte about like how, for example, in Germany, it was massive pushback against the subscription model. They wanted to own stuff. Yet, as you said, they never really owned it. They only own a license, but it's a perception that you relabel something and you break down the payments and all of a sudden people don't want it. It's just like, how do we get everyone happy? And you can't do this, like how, and I think we started talking about education. I think we ended up on sort of no societal issues of where we're going to, the state of humanity, like where do we go with this?
Yeah, but that's because we both kind of lean that way, right? To be honest, I adopt the philosophy that I give to other people, which is do things that you don't normally do. So watch TV that you don't normally watch, listen to music that you don't normally listen to, eat food that you wouldn't normally eat or have never eaten before. All of these things go into this great big melting pot just behind our eyes and above and around our ears. And that's how creativity works. It's different inputs. At the moment, I've got two things that I'm doing at the moment. The first thing I'm doing is a daily project. So my photography and my editing skills have dropped a little bit by the wayside. And so I wanted to get back into that game. It was my photography that needed more work than anything else because I'm a very capable editor, but I'm doing it in an application I don't normally use. So I started doing everything in Lightroom, whereas before I would have got Photoshop to do the heavy lifting for me. And I'm publishing that every day on my Instagram and on my YouTube channel. So there's a little 15-second reel that shows the beginning and what I did and how the final image I achieved. So I'm doing that at the moment. But the other thing I'm doing, because as you know, I started out in fine art before graphics, is I've gone back to life class. So on Thursday evenings, I go to life class and I stand there and I draw with various different things. At the moment, we're drawing with sticks, like actual twigs, and ink on newsprint and doing 2-minute and draw 3-minute. And then, so we start out 5, then 3, then 2-minute drawings. And the 2-minute drawings are where the good stuff is, because that's when you're actually starting to really think about what is the essence of this gesture. How quickly can I catch it? Oh, and kitchen roll. Using kitchen roll as well as, so kitchen roll to block in really quickly and quickly capture a structure. And that's a good thing to do on several levels. Firstly, doing something creative. Secondly, you're with other people who are part of your tribe. Thirdly, and perhaps most importantly, for 2.5 hours, which is the length of our sessions, there are no phones, no screens, no small talk. The only thing you can hear is the scratching of something on something. So in this particular case, twigs on paper. And your mind is absorbed completely in working out those relationships. I've cancelled flights before and rearranged flights. I did it 2 weeks ago when I was working in Ireland. I actually cancelled my flight and rebooked it for the day before because I realised I'd be late for life class. And that is my anchor at the moment for all things creative. There you go.
It sounds like a meditative class. But you've said so many interesting things in this part, because we feel that when we get older, our creativity gets a little bit less.
Your responsibility.
Exactly. Or sometimes you have to make money out of it, right? Whereas eating different food, listening to different music, different all of this stuff. When you flip the canvas, my children are creative powerhouses, but they watch the same telly, they watch the same cartoons over and over again. They don't want to eat any different food that they eat. They like their 7 songs. So I'm thinking like, oh, they're incredibly creative. And I'm like using Ken Robinson's examples of how creativity it's so rife and in our early ages. But we actually don't have the variety in other places because we're still working out of the world. So we feel unchallenged in certain ways, but challenged by what we can't control, because the creativity in earlier lives, we can control. Like we got space to do anything you want as long as you want. And because, in the 15 minutes of your activity, your parents will be cleaning up for 3 hours, but you know what? You had good time. Whereas the things they can't control, they maybe sometimes be rebel against. I don't want to eat this food. This isn't exactly me. I don't like this music, whatever it is that. Show me what maybe I might be interested. Whereas once we sort of master that, we're in control. Somehow we lose the control of creativity. Sometimes thinking like, well, I'm not good at this. The number of clients I've ever had that said, oh, you know what? You're the creative one. You can draw it. I'm like, I'm terrible at drawing. I never attempted. I used to like really, in my younger age, I was very good at classes and art. But I haven't been practicing this. I've been fully sort of digitized. And obviously my work is more about problem solving and sharing in a different way. But I think we have discouraged people from actually saying, you know what? I don't care if I draw with twigs on a kitchen paper. I don't care if I'm doing this, because it's about sharing of the idea. But we have created a world that it judges itself on minute by minute basis. We've got scores for everything. The number of apps that tell you, oh, this month you've done this much, and this month I'm like, why do I need a summary of everything? That's because somebody somehow did some people love it. I think it's pointless, because I feel like, especially when you talk about the mobile phones, that way when the creativity happens. I thought about it the other day, like we got mobile phones because we wanted to make phone calls outside, right? Why do we use them in-house? Why do we use them indoors? Of course, you need to make a phone call, but I've literally told myself, I'm going to just take my phone. I use it only outside. Like at home, I've got a computer screen. I don't have to pick up my phone. I don't have to do this, because everything lives on this ecosystem. But your classes and your sort of connections with creativity, I think fantastic way to actually be back to be mindful and leaving the cable service in the pot somewhere. So I think that's pretty good. I mean, I can tell people what they should be doing, but they need to come to it themselves. So I think conversations like these kind of helped me also realize that maybe I needed something outside my zone. I go on long distance cycles as fast as possible, and you work so many things out, because you have to focus on other things, and disconnecting from all of the ecosystems is the best thing ever. But I kind of feel like we talk about it in the last 15 years, pretty much as the phones ever arrived. Like we had definitely toxic relationship with the work and how work was conducted. Like the mental health or sort of emotional intelligence wasn't necessarily a thing in the workplace. Whereas now it is. Obviously, we're making the right strides, but it's also because we've made everything a lot more busy in our lives. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think we have, but we're filling our own glass in that regard in a lot of the time. And also the thing is with the immediacy of the way things come out, and also the language used around the work we do is sometimes harmful. So our cousins who work in marketing, they've got a job to do, and we have to market ourselves as creatives and the products we make. We do have to do that, and they have to market another thing. But what really grinds my gears, my Family Guy moment, what really grinds my gears is when they mention about things being on trend. And part of the anarcho person that I started out in life as, the minute I hear something that say it's on trend, I just think, fuck that. I'm not going to do that. It's the last thing I'm going to do. And by the way, you've just become one of a very small number of people that have actually got me to use a profanity in a recording. There you go, not my normal thing. But that is essentially what that is, because that's how I think about it. Trends are useful for selling things, but if you are producing work just to go along with that trend, to paraphrase David Bowie, you're not working at it. You're not working at it. You need to break and remix those molds. Don't just build work because it's trendy. build work that sometimes upsets people.
When you think about work on trend, it's just you've convinced enough people to convince themselves that they should be doing what you just created. I think that's what it is, because someone's come up with an idea, and if enough people have seen it, they will go and do this. So sometimes, especially with, let's say, illustrated trends or like certain ways of illustration, we've been doing things 20 years ago, which then caught up 10 years later and it became a trend. And it was like, we did that, but maybe we haven't shown it to enough people, or maybe they've just discovered it. It makes for an outlier to be so much harder to be creative, because it just things are so much easier.
But then you've got amazing people like Tina Tooley. And if you look at what she does and how she goes about doing it, I just think woman is remarkable in what she does. In fact, one of my most prized possessions is a small hemispherical piece of plastic, really, or glass, that she used a whole load of them placed on a piece of glass with a screen underneath it and a camera above it. And she balanced this glass on books. She went through various different books off of her shelf until she got this thing perfectly level. And then you had this illusion where things were going along and creating these weird patterns underneath. Side note, one of my awards from Adobe is a glass globe on a sort of a pyramid kind of shaped. I mean, it's got no point on it. The pyramid's cut off at the top. But a globe on this sort of pyramid thing, all out of glass. And I've got one of those that sits in the bottom left-hand corner of my telly downstairs in my living room. It's there. And it gives, as the screen is presenting different images to me, I can sometimes just sit there and look at this globe. And I immediately think of Tina Tooley, who goes in this process that she does. And it's so analog in so many ways, but the results that she pulls forward from it, she is remarkable.
So you made me think of something that summarizes the whole conversation that we've had today. The reason why Tina Tooley stuff hasn't become a trend per se is because it's hard to do. You don't have to press a button. You don't have to click a few things. We can't buy it off Creative Market or download it as a template. You have to go out and make it happen. And I think this is the difference that separates a true creative to someone who just wants to be on trend accepted, because we have to satisfy our egos and insecurities sometimes. So it's Tina Tooley, I think, is a great example of someone who has created something which will stay true, her own for a while, even though she teaches this in workshops, is because it's hard to make. And I think this is something that's her baseline. She's working on her little clicks and tricks of how to do it. So Tony, thank you. Thank you very much for your time. I enjoyed your analogies about Kung Fu and your teaching, your courses, your daily activities. I think I enjoyed the sticks on the kitchen paper, I think, the most today. So
good.
I also want to say thank you for all the opportunities that you've given me, over the years, and through Adobe and through your channels and stuff.
Well, you're another Bowie. You are.
Thank you. That's a nice compliment.
You are, man.
Tony, thank you so much. I really enjoyed this, and we'll continue in one way or another very time soon.
Fabulous. Thanks, Radim.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Creativity for Sale podcast. This show was produced and presented by me, Radim Malinic. Editing and audio production was masterfully done by Neil Mackay from 7 Million Bikes Podcasts. Theme music was written and produced by Robert Summerfield. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to support the podcast, please subscribe and leave a rating or review. To get your own action plan on how to start and grow a life-changing creative business, you can get a copy of Creativity for Sale book via the links in show notes. As always, keep those creators' fires burning, and until next time, I'm Radim Malinic, your guide through this exploration of passion, creativity, innovation, and the boundless potential within us all. Hey, just a quick note to say thank you for joining me on this episode. If this is your first time or you're a regular listener, please take a minute and rate the show on your chosen platform. A short review helps every show to be more visible to new listeners and provide them with value. So thank you for helping out. Thank you.